This is Zero Signal, where security leaders stop waiting for certainty and start leading through it. I'm Conor Sherman.
And I'm Stuart Mitchell.
Let's get into it. Zero Signal is brought to you by Sysdig. Threat actors are compromising cloud accounts in under 8 minutes. Vulnerabilities are being exploited within 10 hours of disclosure. That's the defender's window, and it keeps closing. Attackers aren't waiting on dashboards. They go straight for what's running. Real time is the only timeline that matters. And that's why Forrester named Sysdig a leader in its latest wave for the cloud-native application protection platforms. Runtime is where real risk shows up, and runtime is what Sysdig is built for. So stop watching and start defending. Learn more at sysdig.com and check out the link in the description. Zero Signal is brought to you by RiskPoint. When the mission is on the line, you don't want a vendor. You want to work with people who've actually been there. I've worked with RiskPoint directly. Together, we took an organization from zero to FedRAMP moderate across a real cloud footprint, and a business unit from zero to CMMC, and we did it all under 9 months. That happened because this team had done it before and moved at the speed the work demanded. Trust, experience, and pace, right when I needed all three. They call it security and compliance made human. Practitioners, not salespeople. In it with you for the long haul, from readiness all the way to authorization. FedRAMP, CMMC, SOC 2, and cloud. Where you go for advice matters. And if you're staring down an audit or an authorization, go to riskpoint.com. That's RISCPOINT.com. Check out the link in the description. Welcome back to Zero Signal. We're speaking with Myke Lyons, the CISO for Cribl, the AI platform for telemetry, the chef turned security leader who's talking about the biggest problems isn't around detections, but it's around the unit economics, the math behind how we're getting the right data to the right place to have the right detections. So there is a ton I want to get into this, Myke. But first of all, welcome onto the show.
It's great to be here. Good to see you both.
Thanks for coming on.
So I do want to start with this conversation around the economics of this, because I think a lot of security leaders forget that one of the most important forcing functions you're going to have in your program comes from the office of the CFO. Like their chief financial officer has a huge weight when it comes to how much do we invest, where do we invest, and how do we do this? And historically, as someone who's built a lot of security operations programs in his time, one of my biggest costs has always been around the data and like this unnecessary or this painful weight the decision I have to make between like, what do I collect? What do I drop? How do I defend that decision? What does the cost look like of this? So I am just love to get your take on how you are managing this as a CISO and how you guys are handling this at Cribl.
So 100%. I got my start in telemetry, so more than a couple of dozen years ago. I got started in telemetry. And so it was something where, as you just described, it was like something I care about and also something I don't care about, right? So you had sort of two paths forward, right? So either I'm going to put it into my SIM, at the time would have been SIM-SEM, now it's just Corda SIM, or I was going to throw it out the window. I think with us now having a lot of modernized approaches to moving data around, and specifically telemetry information, we have options to send things, what we would call sort of the most expensive, highest fidelity things, those like discrete line items that you know that you want to correlate or you want to action if they occur in a negative way, or you want to account for them in a positive way. And send those to the most expensive destination. So think this is the SIM, right? The high cost indexing based systems. And then you have other tiers. So prior we were saying it's kind of binary. It's like keep it or don't. We now have the opportunity for us to grab more information and send it to the right place, which would then provide context to the things that you're looking into. So that would be your threat hunting, use cases, your investigations based on those alerts use cases. And then you have the next tier, right? So just a sort of pyramid scenario, right? It's the easiest way to sort of visualize it. So your top tier is the first one. The second one is that context building. The third one is sort of compulsory information, not information as a security person you're going to action. But when the regulator comes in and starts asking you, when was the last time that Stu logged into that system? We want to see what he was doing at that particular time. Oh, yes, and it was 6 years ago. You can put that in the deep chest freezer, right? You can put it in the cheapest place that is most appropriate for information you may not access. And why is it a deep chest freezer? Why is it so cold? It's because it's not going to come back super fast, but you don't really care how quick it comes back. I mean, in reasonable amounts of time, but days to pull a random query of Stu from October of 2021, it's okay for that return result, right? And then you've got the dev null scenario. So I think this is flexibility that we've struggled with for a long time. And, me, myself, I've had that same struggle. The other thing is I think between SIMs and lakes, those things are getting closer together because data's expensive. And proliferation of data is occurring.
I think there's that the cost of data is so often forgotten in our security conversations, because on security, we often think like, great, we want all the data all the time for everything, because the more I see, the better off I'm going to be. And then there's actually this other angle, which is the cost of it. And there's the cost of making that data quality. And there's the cost of keeping that data forever on a pipeline and a platform that is going to be reliable under that. And so there really is like this trade-off that goes through that.
Yeah, there's and obviously we also I think the last data point that I had read, it was a 28% CAGR on data growth. And that study was done before a lot of the new agentic and generative AI use cases are taking place. And let's be honest, agents aren't creating less data. It'd be wonderful if they were, but they're creating a lot more data.
Yes.
And then
different kinds of data too.
100%.
It's not just the written output or the chain of thought. It's all of the tool calls that they do. That's now needs an audit log, the reasoning at the moment of the chain of tool call, totally agreed. Yeah.
Oh, you've got, Conor bot, Conor bot 1, Conor bot 2,
Oh,
Conor
that's
bot
the
5,
and you can keep
6.
we'll spend the whole podcast on Conor.
How many Conor bots we
Yeah,
have?
exactly that. Episode over. But I totally agree. And I think data, we talk a lot about data should be getting cheaper, but it doesn't. It never does. The price of getting access to data is so expensive. And I think, again, in the CISO seat, we think about it's rare that, not rare, but a lot of CISOs don't really think about these unit economic challenges, which is they can come up with a perfect solution. And I think about it almost I do a lot of work in defense tech, and some of the stuff they make in defense tech is off the charts unbelievable. But if we actually have to use it, not that the US is already in a fairly large deficit as it is from a Department of War perspective, but all they want to do is make this stuff cost effective and cheaper. And I look at it in the same way as security programs, which is you can create the most perfect solution in the world, but if it bankrupts the business, what's the point?
Yes, I think most businesses are in for it to make money, and I think that
not for the children,
not necessarily to solve world peace or make world peace. Those are neither one of those outcomes. No, it's a fair point, and you bring up unit economics. My CFO, who's just an amazing human, he and I have conversations with unit economics. If you were to say unit economics to any employee of my company, there would be a chuckle because they've been in a presentation where he's talking about unit economics being very important for us. And sort of to that vein, the relationship that I have as a CISO and the relationship I've had with in previous CISO roles with the CFO has always been a really valuable relationship, because I think that they're also looking at things from a perspective that could be of value to you. And to be honest with you, the CEO and the CFO ultimately really own risk for the business. Now, there's other roles within the business that play a part. Obviously, the CISO role is a major contributor to that. But the CFO is ultimately the one who's going to be in the audit committee having that enterprise risk management conversation with the CEO standing by them through that conversation.
And it's in almost every company, it's the CEO's call on strategy and direction, right? So if they decide that we're going to have a high risk strategy, as long as you advise them that these are the pitfalls, if they want a 10x growth at a 2x risk, it still does make sense. I know it doesn't feel great from a CISO perspective, but the 1 in 5 shot that versus the growth, some CISO, obviously not every CEO has that level of risk and it's a board decision, but the CEO signs off on it. Your job is to make the most appropriate recommendation.
Yes, I'm over here trying not to find an industry that I would disparage, but unfortunately there's millions of them. There are varying levels of risk tolerance in the industry. I think with companies like ourselves that work in sort of the cyber and technology space, there's a lower tolerance. Then you've got finance is probably the lowest, but then you perhaps have, ad tech and those sorts of scenarios where that tolerance is pretty high.
Yeah.
And so what comes with risk, which is obviously dollars, right? And so how does that play in? So if we can help keep them positively in the right way with dealing with data, the other side of data is, so storage is I would say relatively cheap, depending on what type of storage, but processing and movement of data is increasingly expensive.
Mhm.
And, who also owns the data? That's an important part of me. My being has always said to myself, like, I am a huge fan of if I'm generating that log is mine, right? As the
Yes.
person whose computer has generated it, it's my log. And I think that that's an important thing because I might have a use case that's different than your use case and your use case.
Yeah.
And I should be able to do, have agency over my data. I'm not sure that's going to be the case. My first 3 or 4 SIM solutions very much locked down my access to those data. And therefore, the only way I could do things with it was to take it and move it over to another system and then do some additional processing, which obviously brings in cost.
Yeah.
Thinking about cloud hosting,
Yeah.
egress, where's the biggest bill coming from on the data side? It's always egress.
Yeah, it is funny actually. When I was doing, so a couple of organizations ago, we were building a threat hunting platform. We had all the data lakes, we did thing, and it was the number one cost was the egress cost between cloud providers. So we went back and forth because you break them to the spreadsheet and you're like, oh, hey, here's how the data's coming in, here's how the data's gonna be stored, and then you're like, oh wait, I need to move it somewhere else. And those are network packets that are going over. Those are not, gigabits on a hard disk.
And
So
you could, as a
AWS actually prices things very interestingly. I'll
Yes.
leave it at that. And it is interesting that the cost of packets in and out of their environment. And if you have 2 AWS environments, you pay 4 times in and out in 2 accounts.
it also depends on how you link them up.
Totally. Yeah.
But now if you think about some of those SaaS providers that are providing you security services, they also believe that data will help them in the future make more money. And so are they going to start rate limiting? Are they and it's like, oh, well, at your tier, you're rate limited to
Correct.
X. Oh, if you'd like to take X more data out of the system, well, here's another SKU that you can add into these things. Because is it your data? Once you've given it to them and it goes into their walled garden, is it really your data anymore? So I'm not a huge fan of that. I believe you should be able to put it wherever, in whatever structure you want to put it, in one place, in 10 places. Again, it's your data. You do what you want with it. If you want to give it to me and I do stuff with it, by all means. If you want to get access to it, again, depending on what schema you've chosen for the data, you can get access to it and do your own modeling against it, etc.
So I'm actually kind of curious, so we've got as we have this proliferation of agents through most enterprises, they are creating more data. Just go back to your point on that. But what I'm also seeing is we have this emergent need that's becoming rather pressing is how are we going to detect and respond to the activities of these agents that are coming in? And for the purpose of the conversation, we'll just boil it down to you have 2 agents. You have the agent inside your enterprise that's doing stuff. You authorize them to, but you're not sure they're going to do the right thing and they can do the wrong thing. And then, of course, you have the threat actors. We have like Sysdig's research team putting out like Jade Puffer, where was our first documented end-to-end agentic ransomware extortion campaign end-to-end. And that's the bad person using an AI system to go do stuff. So in both those cases, you need like this near real-time detection, logic, analysis, and then response on this. I'm just curious, as a company, as someone is a CISO of a company whose craft is collecting data, processing it, making decisions on where we're going, how do most CISOs begin to solve this problem? So for those of us who are not in the privileged spot that you are, we have all these data experts around you, but the rest of us lowly CISOs, how do we start to think around this, this whole problem case we have of in the moment detection and response for both an adversarial AI or an AI enterprise that's, for the lack of a better term, going rogue?
Yeah, it's so obviously a lot of the old methodologies and frameworks still apply. Going through the MITRE ATT&CK framework and mapping that back to your detections is a conversation that I think we have internally on a continuous basis. Actually, this morning I was talking to a founder of another company about I have an allergy to false positives. I don't have a whole lot of allergies in my life, but that is one that I absolutely have. I think it creates horrific alert fatigue, which then creates actually a bad culture within your team because now they're just used to blinky lights going off and they become numb to it.
Correct.
And then what do? They end up
It
on
erodes trust too.
It
between your
erodes
stakeholders.
trust. Absolutely. So in this context, when I was speaking to this person, he was saying to me like, yeah, well, when we first implemented solution A, we actually turned on all the rules just to see what was firing. I was like, that is the opposite. You have to
Yes.
have, just maybe to short answer this a little bit, do you have to have the discipline to say, I'm going to turn on one thing at a time. And when I turn that thing on, before I turn on a detection, I'm going to validate that I have the various pieces of information that will be correlated back to that detection so that detection fires appropriately.
Yeah.
So we've been working on that exercise at Cribl since about the beginning of this year. And very recently, we actually, as recently as a couple weeks ago, we acquired a company called Cardinal Ops, which is focused in that area. And, plug to Cardinal Ops because I think they're amazing folks. But the reality is that methodology can be done through really great technologies like them, or can be done the way that we started, which was a manual journey. It is a month-over-month journey, rule by rule. You have to take into account all of the sources, where the information is coming from, whether the data is actually structured appropriately. It doesn't necessarily need to be perfect OCSF data, but you do need to make sure you have the fields, right? If you're looking for a username and you don't have username, it makes it really difficult to detect on username.
And it makes it very easy for your detection agent to go hallucinate a username, which will send you down a whole different path.
Yes, ideally. So it's interesting you say that. I'm not sure that we at Cribl and the security team at Cribl is currently ready to be using full LLMs in detections. I still think that there's a lot of value in us doing more hard and fast and true rules there. That said, though, there is the next phase of once the thing comes in, unlocking LLMs to do various levels of triaging to, again, keep those allergies away from me.
I think keeping allergies away is a really important thing, because I was talking to
allergens. Sorry,
allergens.
allergens.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
Nice.
But if it's only a false positive, it's not as a singular plural. So the question is, I was talking to someone about this the other day, and we were talking about how the whole market has the security community has really gotten themselves enraptured in LLMs as like the logic layer for detection and response. And there's actually, to your point, there's this foundational piece that's still required, which is, do you have just fundamental basic process? Great. Now, can you layer on top of that just ML detections and static correlations? Can you start to do those two things? Then you can have the reasoning on top of that. So reasoning really should be for things, in my opinion, for things that are complicated and you're cool with them being expensive, right? There's cost at an ML detection is negligible. It's CPU cycles, whereas there's actually token cost happening at an LLM space. Even if it's $1 for a query, scale that and you have real money. So I do agree with you. There is a hierarchy here. And if you just start off with like, throw my LLM at the top of all this data and see what comes out, you will get something that comes back. But will it be a false positive? Will it be worth your team's time? That's a hard, the answer is we'll see. But
I mean, I don't go fishing in swamps. So I think if you're going to try to find something, a data swamp is probably not the best, way to start your journey on if we're hoping for a positive outcome. And we'll play a little bit of buzzword bingo, but like tokenomics is very current for us, right? We're looking at like,
are we currently maxing or minimizing? Where are we in this journey?
I think token maxing is now out of fashion.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, I think that was a great week, but it's over now.
It was a great week and a bad bill.
Yes, exactly. And I firmly believe in data tiering. And I think that there's something to be said in just the exercise of going through the data tiering, because it will have you think about what it is that you're going to move from point A to point B. And whilst there's not a ton of uniqueness there is some. And so you're going to put your own color onto whatever that is, because you're in manufacturing or if you're in retail, et cetera. There are varying different types of data that will be more important to you. Obviously, if you're in a retail scenario and you have credit card information, that's also going to be a consideration as you think about telemetry. If you are a healthcare provider, of some sort, and you in fact have potential EPHI, because unfortunately not all healthcare related applications were written with the best security intent. It wasn't a negative intent. It may have been just to get it out the door intent. So there are potential scenarios there. But I do think that the activity of data tiering is just a great practice or great training exercise you can go through.
And many businesses just are horrible at it, right? Like that's the reality. Is we talk about AI SOC, proactive detection and response. But if you've got crap data, like how do you even start? And I think that is like the foundation for a lot of businesses is they can't get their house in order. They think their business is so unique. There's a lot of institutional knowledge and just that doesn't make sense.
Mhm.
And so like without any of the foundational data piece, like you can't do any of the fun stuff anyway.
No, it is a, you know, you're spot on, right? It's being lazy is initially really cheap. It just becomes very expensive in the long term.
Efficient today, horrific tomorrow.
Yes, exactly. I love that. Yeah, fantastic.
Zero Signal is brought to you by Hampton North. I've been responsible for building and turning around cybersecurity programs for companies where a lapse in security just isn't an option. Finance, high tech, AI. Different domains, but the same truth. The programs live and die on talent. And no strategy ships without the right people who share the right DNA. That's why I partner with Hampton North. I've built 3 cybersecurity teams with them, and every time they move faster than anyone else without sacrificing quality. While other agencies are still pushing paperwork, Hampton North already had vetted candidates in front of me. Their executive search is not one size fits all. With one of the largest networks of security leaders in the US, their leadership roles hit the market in days, sometimes hours. And their go-to-market practice covers CROs, CMOs, revenue leaders, and full team build-outs for scaling cybersecurity businesses. They meet every candidate, they reference every story. If you're ready to build and scale and grow your security program, go to hamptonnorth.com and see why brands like Clear, Instacart, Airtable, and OpenAI trust Hampton North to build great teams. Check out the link in the description.
So you started your career as a chef, and you're now here as a CISO.
I mean, chef starts with a C, CISO starts with a C. You
4
guys don't
letters.
follow? Come on.
No.
That makes a
What
ton
are
of
what are
sense.
some of the similarities? Because the crisis stuff must be pretty close.
Yeah, I think crisis management is one I could see happening. Though, what drew you?
Every shift at 100%. I guess I'll talk about the positives and the negatives a little bit, right? So, and one, I would argue pontificate, right? And insulting back to me, pontificating. And I'll leave that one for the second bit. I think the first one is, security is a sort of thrive in chaos type world, right? So people with things like ADD, you know, very much resemble that. You know, we function pretty well with a lot of noise. When I'm having like conversations with people of different ways that they like to work, and having a conversation where I'm like, I could go to the loudest dive bar in the whole world and get so much freaking work done so quickly because there's 17 TVs showing 80 different sporting events, plus of whatever, you know, the latest soap opera is. And these two are fighting over here over this detail, and the waiter or waitress is running around. And as long as I have my sparkling water with lime, I could work all day long there and absolutely crush it. And I think that as a person in a kitchen and going through chaos where the food's late, it's burnt, somebody ordered the wrong thing, they're allergic to black pepper. I doubt there's anybody who's really allergic to black pepper, but they don't like it for
Pretend to.
reasons, right? And it's like, okay, well, it's floating in the air, so you know you're going to die in a restaurant. Please leave now, right? All of those sorts of chaos. The chef who happens to maybe have enjoyed herself a little bit too much last night, and she's showing up a little dusty, and she forgot to put the order in for the special. Like all of that, security people, we thrive in there, right? Especially in investigations.
Mhm.
It comes to dealing with ops, and you've got blinky lights going off, and those blinky lights, you've got varying levels of confidence on those blinking lights. When there's something that occurs, is it a person or persons that are attacking us? Is this part of a campaign? Are we just yet another victim in the scenario? Those sorts of balls that you're kind of tossing up in the air and keeping them as long as you can, there's just a lot of correlations there. So I think that's why for me, getting into cyber and getting into security and computers was a lot about the network of those interconnected systems.
Yeah.
Now, on the positive side, so how have I taken what I learned in operating in kitchens, clearly not very functionally because I don't do it anymore, but like moderately functionally, right? Not getting fired every time. There's a concept of something called mise en place, right? And mise en place is a French term for effectively having everything prepared and ready to go for when you're going to execute against that particular dish. So in a kitchen, you're going to be making, I don't know, a bolognese. We were just recently, we're talking about wine and bolognese, right? So it is your measured portion of your wine. It is your garlic, your onions, your carrots, your mirepoix, as it were, and then beef and all of those things, or if you're using veal or whatever, you're having all of those things measured, chopped, your knives being sharp, your cutting board being ready. You have your uniform on with your with all the various pieces that you need, right?
Yeah.
Just those things that you are ready. That's your mise en place. As a security person, you could take that exact scenario, right? So you have your standard operating procedures, your playbooks for dealing with these things. You have your different detections put in place. You have the systems that are collecting the logs. You might have endpoint agents that are helping to secure them. There's tons of corollaries there, and like it's being ready to get after your job, what you're supposed to do on a day-to-day basis. So my team, here's plus, which is effectively have those things ready, come today prepared for what it's going to be. Today is a bit of a varying,
Yes.
but come to work with your preparedness.
I love that. And I am definitely going to, once I know how to say it, I'm definitely
And
going to
cook.
seal it.
Once you also know how to cook.
God, no, that's going to take way too long. But I really like that because actually it does tie into this data story too. About there's this conversation, as I start to explain that, I'm like, there is this preparedness we have around operating procedures of like, do I know when this happens, how I'm going to respond? But part of being ready is also, do you have the right tools and you have the right data sets available to go execute on those? And I think this could be a really interesting framework or set of thinking to bring into the risk-based scenarios or threat-based scenarios. We say, okay, if we have a threat actor who does A, B, C, and D, and you start to build out those threat scenarios, do we have the capabilities? Do we have the data that we'd actually be able to detect, respond, contain, and go through that whole life cycle? I know it sounds so very fundamental, but it's so easy to forget that in the day-to-day of running a security organization or building out your team, or your team's like, I'm just trying to firefight what's in front of me to get through this audit or handle this customer request. And you're like, hold on, let's remember that we actually still need these fundamentals in place to
when
be
Mars
ready to
attacks,
execute.
are you going to know what they look like?
Yeah.
Mhm.
And like, there's your IOCs right off the gate. Are you going to know how they're going to attack us? Well, those are your TTPs. Like, all of that preparedness is absolutely critical for us.
I would also add something that I've observed about you. We've eaten together a few times. Like the other thing is to be an expert in your field. To be a chef, you have to be so researched, so well read. I've eaten with you. You assess everything on a menu to a T, and I've seen you grill a few waitresses and waiters of where maybe the truffles were picked, etc.
What was the name of this chicken you're serving me
That
now?
is exactly it. But the level of detail and preparation, like, you've obviously well researched in one field, and so you can speak with I guess with confidence. The same is to be said if you're a CISO. If you go into these situations and you're not up to date, you're not current, and you have no idea what your team are actually working on, I think you lose a lot of credibility there. In the same way, if you were, as a chef, like, not understanding the level of detail that you go through in preparing a dish, or you missed, like, I know you worked in some tough kitchens as well. If you didn't know the ingredients, like, you lose credibility immediately.
You'd get smoked. I have a funny story about that. So I was in Napa, working in a kitchen, and
Can we just say the name of the kitchen?
Which one?
it's more of a well-known neighborhood restaurant called Bistro Don Giovanni. So it's just on Highway 29 at the base, and I worked for Donna and Giovanni Scala, who were amazing. Learned a ton, through working with them. Met a ton of pretty incredible people, because the neighbors of that are the Mondavi family.
And some incredible bottles of wine, I'm
yes,
sure.
and not terrible. So I did get the pleasure of meeting Robert Mondavi when he was around. I met Francis Ford Coppola. I'm like not a huge movie fan, but I do like movies, right?
Yeah.
Obviously, I'm not an idiot. I know who Francis Ford Coppola is, right? But he was there, and I had the opportunity to meet him, and he gave me a bottle of one of the wines or whatever, and it was super cool. So at any rate, I'm from New Jersey. I was born in different places, but I'm from New Jersey, and at that time I was not as world traveled. And for me, I know what a rosemary plant looks like.
Mhm.
But in Napa, there's no such thing as a rosemary plant. It's different looking. So I'm asked to go get a container of rosemary. So here's a pair of scissors and a bucket. Go outside. And I go to the herb garden, like a champ. I'm over there and I'm looking around. There's thyme, there's oregano, there's cilantro, and all these things. And I come inside and I'm like, to the wrong person on the line, where is the rosemary? And I had a nickname back then, and it was a sarcastic nickname, and it was Wachinango. And so Wachinango's looking for the rosemary, and the whole line just starts cracking up, right? And here I am sitting with these stupid scissors in this freaking bucket, and they walk me outside, and they point at the hedgerow that surrounds the entire freaking restaurant. The whole thing was rosemary, and I'm expecting this spiky little 2 foot tall plant. No, not in Napa. The whole damn restaurant is surrounded with a trimmed hedge. So that hedge trimmers that come by, they are literally just dumping rosemary on the ground.
That is amazing.
Yeah.
That is amazing. And Frank, who you said?
Francis Ford Coppola?
Yeah. Who was that?
Pass.
Okay.
Okay.
You
had me.
You're
for a
more
second.
cultured than us.
Well,
okay.
he happens to be a very famous director. Sofia Coppola,
Okay.
his daughter. She's also a famous director.
Can you give me a movie?
Oh my God.
Godfather?
Oh, I've never heard of it.
Okay. So
It's
this
a New
is
Jersey classic.
We're done.
So there we go. I wanted yes. So credibility. Gone.
Gone.
Done.
Okay, we've got some.
Ross
we've got
Jasonde, by the way.
You
is gonna be
guys know some
very
homework
cross.
to
So this
do.
I want to bring us in. So because we could have the similar thing in cyber too, where you can have these moments where we have these foot faults and then people just instantly, we don't know quite how to handle breaches in cybersecurity. So in the same way, like I know nothing about anybody who's culturally relevant at all. Like I'm just
we established that.
we've
yeah.
established that clearly. So, there's definitely like those moments. I'm actually kind of curious your take. Like as a security community, we also get that same thing where sometimes we get a little persnickety about people who go through a breach or have a material incident where we all like look at each other and we know that it's just a numbers game. Like there's just the amount of time that needs to pass before you have a material security event. I'm kind of curious if you had a thought on how as an industry we could start to shift that positioning, that if someone's leading a security program at a company or there's a company and they do have a material security event, they do have a breach and they're coming out the other side of it, how we can start to remove that stigma from it. Because sometimes you just can't find the hedgerow.
It's interesting you say that. You have I think a different perspective on the stigma attached to it. And maybe perhaps it's just that I am maybe just a little very empathetic to operators.
Yes.
Now, granted, there's plenty of people who cause their own incidents, and those people, stigma well attached. But I think when a company has a breach, like if I think like Target, for example, right? That's the one everybody still loves to talk about, and here I am talking about it. That particular breach we use is like, well, don't be a, whoever, insert company here, a Lowe's, a Target, all these sorts of businesses. And at that time, I took a very consumer point of view. Like, I'm a customer of them and they broke my trust. And how did they break my trust? Well, they did really poor separation within their network. And as a result, the HVAC system got popped and it led all the way over to the point of sale system, which is where they were there exploiting. And then you've got the home improvements sector where there was some dude in the parking lot with a thing. So I guess to answer or maybe respond to how you're stating this, I think there is stigma, but I think it's small. I think we might stigmatize each other. We're like, how did you let that happen, right? But I hope that people get to the point at which, first off, in the Hugging Face incident that just occurred recently, very high level of transparency. And I think that's super important for entities. I think others have had breaches from, North Korean IT workers attacks and things like that. Being very open about what you have experienced and how you've responded to it. I think that's the best way, is sort of come in and, take it for what it's worth. I also think that the network of people in cyber are better defending each other around these situations.
Yeah.
And I think we're getting there. Unfortunately, people outside of cyber, and more importantly, people outside of technology, have no idea what it is that happens when an incident occurs. And you have, unfortunately, sort of money grubbing attorneys that are just trying to get money or get a headline or just get a headline effectively. And so they're taking it out of context. And then when you talk about situations like juries and things like that, this is not a group of people that are all technologists and cyber experts.
No.
These are people from all different perspectives. So I think if we can stand together as an industry and get aligned to support each other in the right way when people make good decisions and being transparent and helping others learn from what occurred in our environment, we're going to be better off.
I've got a couple of points. One, I actually think a security incident handled, like I hire for a lot of security executives, right? Most companies want a CISO who's been popped and handled it well. The second choice is someone who hasn't been popped. The third choice is someone who's been popped and did a horrible job. And most of it is PR, right? And I think if you have a good team around you are handling that, I think that's really important. But I actually think most companies want someone who's been through it now. 5-10 years ago, that wasn't the case, but it's just an inevitability at some point. I think the second point is, from an industry perspective, it doesn't help. There are some companies who see this as a sales opportunity and use FUD in a pretty toxic manner of like, hey, don't be target. Like, my product will make sure. And it started to get worse, and I think people are starting to call these companies out, and we're very lazily blame sales teams. That message comes from the top. Like, I blame executives. When someone, in my opinion, bitches out a sales leader, that is a cultural problem from the top. But salespeople are good punching bags, which is why they get paid a lot of money to do what they do with very low barrier to entry, is because they'll get punched enough times and get back up. But I think that the stigma comes from businesses using it as a platform to make sales.
Agreed. And if you're looking, unfortunately, we have a large corpus of data that LLMs are trained on. So if I just plug it in, how do I take this URL incident and use that to help sell my business? I guarantee the robots are also going to tell us just to create more FUD and spread it around, which is an unfortunate scenario.
But I like one of the ingredients that you highlighted there, which is I love what you called out there, which is transparency. Like, that is such a foundational piece. And when I think about the CISOs and security leaders who've navigated breach as well, they start off by having an executive team that totally takes ownership of it quickly. Then they are clear about what is real and what is unknown. And they know they're going to be inundated with 1,000 questions that they don't have answers for. And they're okay with that. And then they get to work and they come back and there's regular updates and all those things. So I think it is that combination of like, are you willing to own it? Are you willing to be transparent? And then are you willing to do the hard work? And then it's the PR side. Can you start to communicate out effectively what's happening or not? So
I think SolarWinds' executive team, inclusive of their CISO, did an exceptional job supporting each other, supporting their customers. The scenario is the scenario. It's a horrible scenario.
Yes.
They had a good outcome in the end, but the level of transparency and support that they provided to each other was something that we should look at and say, you know what? There might have been flaws along the way, but the reality was it was wholesome and it was directionally right.
When the case was finally dropped against Tim Brown, what I was so encouraged was you could see the entire security community just rally around and encourage him. So like, there were a lot of people who were on his side throughout the whole thing and they're just giving the moral support, and then just come around the other side when the case was dropped and like, we're finally through this mess. This needless angst that he was put through was insane. And so just come out the other side of that, and you could just see, we must have had like 150 leaders on that call, just like, we are just going to just spend a minute to congratulate him for him being out of this hellish circumstance.
I've never had a Wells notice sent to me, but holy does it scare the hell out of me. The idea that I could be put in prison for something that is, I would say, wholly out of my control. And I think also his CEO, which he's spoken publicly about, his CEO backed him in a really strong way and got behind it. And I think that's the team. And then secondly, I think what's led to that is how they processed and handled that particular security incident. And we all learned from it.
For what it's worth, what did frustrate me about that incident is actually 150 is not a lot. And I think a lot of people were quite judgmental, and there were a lot of people on a high horse who potentially haven't sat in the high profile seat yet and, think that they could come into some of these jobs and do it better. Either they're not in a leadership role yet, or they're in I would say like a low risk, low stress leadership role who are incredibly judgmental. So I think like, we're quite a good community for the most part, but there are a lot of people who are incredibly judgmental, which goes back to the point. Like, I get why some people don't want to lead with a breach, because there are some pretty terrible people who will drag you down. And, it's hard not to read everything you see on the internet when people are publicly giving you shame on Reddit threads, on LinkedIn. Like, there were some pretty horrible comments that I read, and it's not nice to see, but it is the reality of the situation.
The solution is don't go on LinkedIn and don't go on Reddit.
Don't go on the internet.
Or to quote Mel Robbins, let them. Let them.
That's it.
All right. So there's one of the pieces. We're talking about the worst day. Let's talk about the other side of the coin here. Because like, there's this transparency that leads to trust, and in the good times. So I want to round us off with this last concept here, which is, you were somebody, one of the few, there's a handful of security leaders who can look back and say, like, you have built trust programs that have demonstrated, that have really set the industry standard on how you build like field-facing security programs that have a material impact to the growth and revenue of the organizations. You did it at ServiceNow, you've got it here at Cribl, you've done it at other places. I would love to get your take on just what what does the future of that done well look like?
So, complicated question, but thanks for the question anyway. It is, I think for me, first, easy to say integrity, right? And security people, it's part of the triad, right? Confidentiality, integrity, and availability. The other two probably play a big part here. Availability is obviously a little bit more easy to identify, but I think integrity is important. And in that, you've got to be able to identify whether or not something that you're going into talking to someone about is functionally going to make them better. Right. And so I think you've got to be invested in people. And I think that's most important. That's with my security team. And that's also with my customers, my partners, my prospective customers. So, if you could make someone else successful, I don't necessarily believe in karma, but I do believe in maths. And the more good situations you end up being in, the more good will happen to you. You can call it karma. You can just call it, situational scenarios. So I do think that if you're sort of paying it forward and working with someone, there have been plenty of instances where I have had a conversation with a security leader at some company, and my sales person is like, we really need them to just buy our stuff, in nicer words than that, but effectively, reading between the lines, they need to buy our stuff. And I have had a conversation with that individual and walked out of that room and walked back and said, even if they say yes, they're probably not going to be successful here. Like, this isn't going to make or break their success here. So I think it's important to look at it and know not just like whether or not they have the budget, but also just looking at the way you believe they can execute. Now, it's not for me to tell them whether or not they should do X or Y. It is really up to them. So not going to be patronizing them. However, making myself available to them for any way, shape, or form, reaching out to people is hard generally, right? It's uncomfortable. You're not personal friends with most of these folks. They're just good people. They're good people. It'd be great if you were friends with them, but they don't live nearby or whatever the case may be, right? So I think for me, that's probably the core of being successful there. The second thing is be empathetic to the sellers.
Yes. I think that's huge for field CISOs to be aware of that. Yeah.
There's sellers out there that are like some of my best friends, like really good people, and they're good people, and that they're in there for the right reasons. They might have tactics that you're like, holy, this is uncomfortable. And then you watch them bottle up and just deliver those things. Like, that to me is impressive. They're not there because they're underachievers in almost every instance, right? These are people that strive to win. A lot of them have athletic backgrounds because that's where it is, very competitive. So I think having empathy with the field. And then I think separately as a security person, and maybe the third one would be to look at what you're hearing across the board for each one of those interactions and helping them jump over certain hurdles that they're going to have. Like, we are professionals in our fields. We are learning and operating, and we are in their shoes or have been in their shoes. There's very few field CISOs who go from, I was a line cook and now I'm a field CISO, right? There's very few.
About one I can think of.
I took a couple of hops along the way and that works. But yes, so there's very few, right? So take those things that you see and sort of zoom out a little bit and see the forest, and then try to give people a little bit of a map about how they can navigate through that forest. And that requires you to get in front of sellers as a person who's going to be a thought leader for them. And I think that really helps.
It's also refreshing to hear, that you're going back to the sellers, right? The job of the business is to make more sales and drive more revenue.
Yes.
Like, that's how we all get paid.
We're all part of the business.
Correct.
Right? The business as a concept, we are all part of the business. Yeah. I think that's an important thing to take into heart, because as a very a CISO that I really appreciate, a guy called Justin Dolly, who's been a lifelong friend, he says that when the house is on fire, the last thing you're going to do is change the locks.
Nice.
That is well said.
I stole it.
That's it. As my father would say, it's like you quote the person the first time, and then it's like, as I sometimes say, as I always say, and now it's yours forever. There you go.
That's it.
All right. So with that, Myke, thank you so much for coming on the pod today. Myke Lyons is the CISO for Cribl, the AI platform for telemetry. Thank you so much for making the time for coming on the show today.
Thanks, Conor. Thanks, too.
If today's conversation gave you something useful, a framework, a question worth sitting with, a way to position something you're already dealing with, that's the point. Connect with Conor and I on LinkedIn. The links are in the show notes. Tell us what landed.
And if you know another security leader who's navigating the same pressure, text them this episode. We'll see you next time.
resonate.